Hello again, AP Psychology students. It's another video lecture day as I am gone once again, but this should be our last one, potentially for the school year, as I will be back next week and for the foreseeable future. So, today in class, what you are doing is you are learning about stress, everyone's favorite topic. And in particular, what we're going to be focusing on today is not only what is happening physiologically in your body as well as psychologically with stress, but we're also going to be talking about ways you can cope and manage with your stress. Ultimately, where this lesson is going is kind of to two routes. Number one, once you're done with watching this video lecture, you're going to be going into Google Classroom here and finding a question that is going to be posed to you called a stress reflection, where essentially you're going to be looking at this scale, the stress scale that's produced by Baylor University, and deciding kind of on this scale how much stress you're experiencing in your life, at least according to this metric, and then reflecting on how you would characterize your level of stress in a high, medium, or low amount. And then you're going to be thinking about ways that you manage your stress, which we're going to be talking about today in today's lecture, which is going to be part of the lecture slides that I go through. And then optionally at the end, there's no worksheet or anything with this, but if you want to learn more on this topic, there is this good TED Talk that's here that I will link to this lesson that you can go and check out on your own time if you want to. Certainly not required, but it's kind of got an interesting take. It's the titled "How to Make Stress Your Friend," and there's some research that's out there that actually stress could be a good thing depending on how you manage it and view it. And so this video kind of goes into that concept if you want to check that out. But first things first, let's jump into the slideshow and get you guys understanding the key terms and concepts you need to know from an AP psychology perspective about stress and its impact on your health. This is kind of the second to last day of notes from the first part of this unit. So next week on Monday, we'll wrap everything up by starting to talk about what's called positive psychology, which kind of fits into this idea of health and how to live a healthy life. And then we're actually going to watch a documentary next Monday, Tuesday, before gearing up for your quiz. I'll introduce the summative project also next week. So some summatives next week once we get through the last part of this first part of the unit. So stress and health. So again, we're kind of asking ourselves this question: how much stress do we think we are under? What's actually happening to our bodies when we experience stress? And how do we cope with stress? We want to make sure we give tools, because I think a lot of times the conversation around stress in our world is like, oh my gosh, students these days, you guys are under so much stress. And there's truth to that. Like if you look at survey data, you guys are living in a generation of people that are overly stressed and overly anxious more than other generations before. At least that's what the survey data is coming back with. Managing the stress, though, is a key component here. Just because you're under a lot of stress doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily have a lot of negative health outcomes. How you deal with the stress plays an important role. So we'll come back to that in a little bit here. So stress and stressors. So what do we mean by the word stress? Well, stress is the process by which we perceive and respond to certain events in our life, which we call stressors. So negative things or challenging things that are in our environment that we perceive as a threat or a challenge. And stress itself is both a physiological thing. There are physical changes happening in your body, as well as emotional and psychological. And as we talked about earlier in this unit, we talked about how it's a two-way system, right? Your mind affects your body and your body affects your mind. And so if you're feeling physically stressed, it can start to eat away at your mental composure. And on the flip side, if you're emotionally and psychologically stressed and dealing with a lot of stuff, it can start to have physical effects on your body. So it is a two-way system, and there's ways that you can attack and cope with stress, both with the mind and body, which we'll come back to. So when we characterize stress and stressors, it's important to note that there are both what are called acute stressors and chronic stressors. So acute means short-lived, and chronic, if something is chronic, it means it's ongoing, long-lasting. So acute stressors we deal with all the time. These could be like, hey, you got a test coming up in this class. That sucks. It's something you have to prepare for. You have to maybe get a little stressed over. Different daily hassles you have to deal with, like classroom interruptions, I don't know, whatever it might be, injuries, things that exist, but they are going to get resolved. They're only going to last for a short period of time. You'll deal with the stressor and hopefully be able to move on. Chronic stressors, on the other hand, they are more ongoing, long lasting. And these could be chronic health conditions, relationships that are stressful, whether that's with your parents or a sibling or a loved one in some way or a friend. If you're dealing with a lot of stress in that relationship, you can't exactly get rid of it all the time. Legally speaking, in certain circumstances, you can't just like get rid of a person. And jobs in school, right? You have to deal with school continuously before you graduate. Same with a job. You can always quit a job, I suppose, and switch to a different one. But that itself may or may not resolve the stressor, depending on what's actually causing the stress. Now, when we deal with a stress response, the first thing that's going to happen in our body when we have one of these stressors come into our life is we have what's called a fight or flight response. And we've studied this already because back in Unit 2, when we looked at the nervous system, we talked about the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for this fight or flight response here. So, if you remember what a fight or flight response does, what a sympathetic nervous system response is it activates your body. So it increases your heart rate, it increases your breathing, it increases blood flow. Your pupils dilate, you focus. The reason this is happening in your body is because you've perceived some sort of challenge or threat. And in response, your body is activating you to deal with it. And this is technically a good thing. And we'll come back to that point in a little bit here. If you didn't get stressed in a true emergency situation, your body's activation system of how your muscles respond, your breathing, your heart rate to get ready to run or take on the challenge may not have prepared you for actually dealing with the actual true threat. And then that's going to potentially end up with, negative circumstances for you, life altering circumstances. Um, the unfortunate thing, though, is that we often get stressed by things that aren't life threatening and aren't challenges to the point that are going to be life or death situations that we need this fight or flight response. And your body doesn't really know how to often react differentially. It's an automatic system, right? So anything your brain starts to perceive as a potential challenge or threat, you'll start to have this fight or flight response. Okay. So what is happening during this fight or flight response? The stress response system is something that was studied by a psychologist named Hans Selye. I'm not sure how to say his last name. He studied mice, and what he was doing was he was putting mice in kind of threatening situations. I think in one instance he was like putting them into a vat of like water and having them swim, but there'd be like no way out. And so, which probably not super ethical, but he was studying this to see kind of what happens to their heart rate, to their breathing, and to their chemicals in their body, their hormones. And what he discovered through this process, and thereby we can make this extension, humans have a similar response cycle, is that we go through a 3-step phase of our stress response. So this is what he called the general adaptation syndrome, otherwise known as GAS. So the 3 steps is alarm, then resistance, then exhaustion. So in the alarm phase, it's when your body's is activating your sympathetic nervous system. You can see in this little chart up here, what's actually occurring is a slight dip in your ability to resist the stress. This is over a period of time here, and this is a very brief amount of time in phase 1. It's that immediate sinking feeling you might get when you feel really stressed out. You get almost like a sinking feeling. That's kind of what's happening here in this initial stress response. And then your brain says basically, hey, we need to activate all these bodily systems, which I'll get to in a little bit here, but we're talking about stress hormones, the release of adrenaline, maybe. And as that happens, the stress resistance climbs up, and that's stage 2 then. Stage 2 is when you're coping with the stress, you're resisting it. So you're at this heightened level of activation. Your breathing has increased, your pulse has increased. You're kind of at this heightened state of arousal, and you maintain that as long as you're dealing with the stressor. Now, in many cases, we resolve the stressor, we deal with the problem, and then hopefully our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. If you remember that one, that's our rest and digest. It calms us back down. But for some people, if you're dealing with a long, prolonged, chronic stressor that doesn't resolve, you can reach this third stage of the stress response, which is when your body's resources are depleted. You've used up all of the energy you can contribute towards this stressful situation. And then you hit the third stage, which is called exhaustion. And exhaustion is where you start to see the negative health effects kick in. So all the things you've heard about how stress can be bad for your health, whether we're talking about like heart disease or graying hair or kind of like, I don't know, IBS symptoms. So you're dealing with digestional issues and other stuff like that. That could be because you've hit this kind of third stage of exhaustion. And you're actually more likely to get sick too, and possible illness and death coming with that. So These three stages, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion, is kind of how we progress through a stress response. So my mnemonic device for you on this one is GAS, general adaptation syndrome. General adaptation syndrome are bad. Gas are bad. Instead of saying gas is bad, like smelly gas, farting. Gas is bad. Gas are bad. We just use poor grammar here. R standing for alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So hopefully that mnemonic device helps you remember that stress reaction. Now, like I said, the physical changes in your body can result in some negative health outcomes for you. This is what a field of research is called psychoneuroimmunology, which is a mouthful, and you probably won't need to know this for the sake of the test. I'm not going to have a test question on this, but it gives you a better understanding of the context behind why people are having negative physical health effects with stress. If you break down what that wording is, psycho is referring to our psychology, our mental state, our stress, kind of psychological stress. Neuro is referring to our brain's interaction with our immune system, immunology. And what this does is it studies how our psychology, how our mental processes affect our overall health and immune system. And when you're under a great deal of stress, research has shown that you can become immunosuppressed, immunocompromised. So, what we mean by this is because your body's resources during this kind of resistance phase are being dedicated towards dealing with this stressor, you're in this heightened state of arousal, your body's resources are being devoted there. They are not being devoted towards protecting you from illnesses. So there's been a lot of research that shows that when you're in a heightened state of stress and emotional not well-being, you're actually more likely to get sick. You have a slower rate of healing if you're recovering from like a muscle strain or something like that, or a physical illness. Um, Diseases in your body will be more easily able to take over certain things, like long-lasting chronic diseases. You're more prone to a bunch of other negative health outcomes as you become older. So living under stress throughout much of your life, particularly if that stress is having a negative impact on your health, in the long chronic term, that can have, unfortunately, some negative health effects on you. Now, why is that the case? Again, we already talked about, in part, the idea of diverting resources. And so you don't have the resources to protect your physical body because you're focusing on the stressor. But it's also the way that our stress hormone works. So our stress hormone is called cortisol. Cortisol is what the body initially releases when it detects a stress response. So your body detects a threatening or challenging situation. Cortisol is released, and that stimulates this general adaptation syndrome. Now, cortisol in a high dosage has been linked to coronary heart disease because what it does is it constricts and narrows your blood vessels because it's helping like get the blood flowing through your body that way. But if you're living in a chronic state of this, right, it's ongoing, it's not going away. That consistent kind of tightening of those blood vessels can lead to some long-term damage with your hearts and clogging of the vessels around the heart. And this is where you can see in this chart down here, if you can make this out, this is incidence of coronary heart disease. In other words, how common is it? And then down on the x-axis is the percentage of stress reaction. And people that have low levels of stress typically don't have as much coronary heart disease. But as you get into this upper level of stress and high level of stress response, kind of how people respond to it, you start to see higher incidence of coronary heart disease. And this is particularly true for a type of person called a type A personality trait. We're going to talk about personality in the second half of this unit. Personality is the tail end of Unit 7. One way you can characterize personality is type A versus type B. And I don't know if you've heard of this before, but a type A individual tends to be someone who is a little bit more competitive, aggressive, high strung, achievement orientated, driven. There's a lot of good things about being type A, but they also are more stress reactive. When things aren't going their way, when their achievements aren't being met, they might react more negatively. A type B personality trait is someone who's really laid back, chill, go with the flow, more even keel, may not have a lot of drive towards like achieving high things. And it's worth noting not everyone is going to fit perfectly into type A or type B. Some of us are probably more prone to one type or the other, but a little bit of a mix. Like myself, I think I'm kind of dominant type B, more laid back, but also I have some type A tendencies. So I'm BA. Anyways, so you can kind of think about how you are, how your family members are, if you're more in that type A or type B. The outcomes here, though, is if you're type B, the stress you're under is less likely to have negative health impacts. If you're type A and you're under a great deal of stress, you're more likely to have negative health outcomes. But this isn't necessarily the case for every single individual. And that's what I wanted to point out here on this slide. Stress can be helpful. And this is where that video comes in. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, you can watch that TED Talk. The woman does a great job explaining, the doctor does, in explaining kind of what is a underlying research study behind how stress can be beneficial to us. And what her big takeaway essentially is this: how you choose to view stressors in your life is the most important thing, more than actually dealing with stress in your life. So, what we mean by that is it's your lens through which you view the stressful situation. Do you view it as an overwhelming negative challenge you can't handle? Or do you view it as like a positive kind of like situation in which you can prove to yourself how well you can achieve something and you can overcome this? And the idea of being an optimist about it versus being more pessimistic. Optimistic people that are going to view it as a challenge that they can overcome, they're not going to have the negative health outcomes of the stress reaction. Where the negative pessimistic, I'm overwhelmed all the time by it, they are going to more likely have the negative health outcomes. So this video kind of goes into that research and how they figured that out. And it's pretty good. So it is linked. It looks like this. It's linked to this lesson plan if you want to check it out once we're done with my last, I think, 2 slides here, after you type up your little exit ticket, of course. Okay, so we all know that we're under a great deal of stress in society. We live in a stressful, anxious world. What's most important, though, is your mindset about that stress, how you're dealing with it, as well as what are your coping strategies. Because it's not if, it's when. It's not if you're going to deal with stress. Everyone is going to deal with stress in life. Like everybody in this room that's watching this video has stressful situations, whether you know it or not. But one of the key thing is, what are your coping strategies? So when we say coping, we're talking about how you're managing stress, both with your mind and body. And I've got, a handful of things here that you can reflect on, and which ones do you tend to do. If you have your own coping strategies, you can also type about that in the reflection question. So here are some that you can do with your mind. So social support. When you have a stress reaction, not only do you release cortisol, but you actually also release oxytocin. And oxytocin is, we've talked about it before a little bit, I think. It's called sometimes the love hormone or bonding hormone. You get it when you hug people, when you relate to people, when you connect to others. Mothers produce it when they breastfeed their newborn, and the newborn gets it as well when they are breastfeeding. So it helps form social bonds, basically. And what this would say then is, if stress is causing this kind of social reaction, this kind of reaction in your body, it would be encouraging you to seek out people. And that's why sometimes it feels so good to talk to someone about your social situation, talking to a therapist, talking to a friend. Discussing the problems that you're facing in life, venting about it, is a good mechanism for dealing with stress. Sometimes just having an opportunity to share it as compared to bottling it up helps reduce some of that stress load from yourself. There's also the opportunity to do what's called reframing. Reframing is changing the way you think about the situation. So we talked about framing, which is like the way something is phrased. Reframing is kind of a similar concept, but it's about the way you think about the stressful situation. So you got a big test coming up. There's a reality that you're going to deal with that test. Some people try to reframe that in their mind, not as this negative thing where it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared I'm going to fail, and I'm like very focused on like not failing, basically, to reframing it as, you know what, like I have the ability to do this. I'm going to reframe it in my mind as a challenge that I'm going to overcome. And this is easier said than done. For a lot of people, it's hard to get out of your own mindset, your habits of the way you've thought. But there's a lot of research that shows that if you can successfully reframe a situation, think about it from a different perspective, you can have better outcomes of dealing with your stress. Repressive coping is another mental strategy. So repression means like not thinking about it. And so these ones would be most helpful. This coping strategy would be most helpful if it's a situation you really truly can't do anything to change, right? There are certain realities that in life circumstances you really can't change, about maybe your physical health or about like what's happening in your household, and there's like something you can't do to fix the problem, if you will. If that's the case, it's something you can't fix. Repressive coping actually might be your best strategy. Trying to get your mind off of it. Think about other things. because it doesn't help you to think through the issue again and again. Other people find support with faith communities or spiritual support. Having a common group of people that have similar beliefs and attitudes and sharing with them, kind of back to the social support, can be very beneficial for many people. And then the last thing that's on here is catharsis. Catharsis is essentially a stress release activity. This one would be more. This one could be both emotional and physical, in depending on what you're doing to get your catharsis. Catharsis just means you release your stress and anger and aggression out onto something. So some people, they punch a pillow, right, or scream into a pillow, and that can make them feel better afterwards. Playing a sport can be very cathartic. If you've exerted your energy, you've kind of used up your sympathetic nervous system resources, that can actually force a parasympathetic system response, and then you'll feel less stressed afterwards. Other people just need a really good cry, right? And sometimes after that great cry, you feel better about the situation to some degree, or you've emotionally drained yourself, and then you kind of re-regulate your hormones and energy level. So catharsis is just kind of getting to this point of you've had your emotional release and now you feel a little bit better about your stress situation. So those are all emotional and mental stressful coping strategies. There's also physical things you can do. And the idea behind these physical things is to try to hijack your central nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system. So we know we're having a sympathetic nervous system response. How can we basically force ourselves into a parasympathetic nervous system response? So there's a couple ways you could do this. Exercise is great. Not only does exercise exert your body and release a bunch of dopamine and endorphins and other things that are going to feel good, but it kind of forces your body to have to relax because you need to recover because you're tired and exhausted. And that's going to create that parasympathetic nervous system response. And it also trains your body to like control certain realities in your life. Daily or weekly exercise routines, getting in a habit of that can be very helpful towards managing stress. There's also relaxation techniques and meditation and mindfulness. Trying to calm your mind through kind of guided practice where people talk you through focusing on certain words or trying to empty your mind. There's been some research on like Buddhist monks that do this on a regular basis. We'll see some of this when we watch a documentary next week about how that strengthens brain connections, helps calm the mind, helps you focus. And so getting into some, and it has to be a regular practice. That's important to note. It can't just be like a one-off, like, hey, I did mindfulness once. Now I'm cured of my stress. But if it's a regular practice you build into your habits, that can be beneficial too. Okay. Mindfulness is a reflective practice where you try to focus intensely and intently on the current situation you're in, not letting your mind wander a bunch of things. And it's hard. If you haven't tried practicing mindfulness, you should try it at some point. Just YouTube something about like a mindfulness walkthrough or guide. And there's some interesting stuff that's out there that is a challenge to try to get your mind to be able to relax and focus and not wander onto other things. Okay, so that's it for the notes. Again, what we're going to pivot to now is in Google Classroom, there is this stress reflection right here. And if you open this up, there's kind of two questions you're responding to. First of all, what level of stress would you say you are under? This is linked, and if you want to check this out, it tries to give a way to characterize like a stress score. You're welcome to look through this. You don't necessarily need to. If you know that you're under a great deal of stress already, or a moderate, or you're pretty sure you're under a low level of stress, you don't need to have to go through this. But if you're not sure, this can give you some sense of kind of like how much stress am I under compared to maybe other people. And it gives you a score at the bottom and says, are you under a major amount, a serious amount, moderate, etc., down to very little. So after you look through this, you're going to respond to the question about how much stress you're under. And then secondly, thinking about the coping strategies we just discussed, is there a coping strategy you have used in the past or are currently using that works well for you? If not, is there something that maybe you would be willing to try? Or if you have a different strategy that wasn't mentioned and you found it helpful, you can write about that as well. Remember that if you don't want to put your comment in the public domain here, you can always type it in the private comment section when you want to post it. Okay. And then the only other thing, and this will be on the stream with this lesson today, is linked in here. You'll also find this video. If you've got time at the end here after you've typed up a response that you want to watch something else about stress and managing stress, this video is a pretty nice take on how to change your view of stress and how it could be beneficial to your health. So that's it for today. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday. And as always, email me if you have any questions. Thanks.